Hello there, everybody. It's Mike Yao with Savage Kingdoms role-playing game at Fire in the Head Productions. So I promised last week in last week's video that I would do a follow-up video about the magic system of the upcoming 4th edition of Savage Kingdoms role-playing game. So here it is. The last one before, if you were one of the 12 people who saw it, maybe a few more people, hopefully. That one was about the new combat system. Actually, I say new, it's like 95% the way it was, but I've made some nice little tweaks, at least I think so, for the upcoming edition of 4th edition Savage Kingdoms. By the way, I'm not sure I'm going to kickstart it or not. I might just make it a thing, just make a PDF about it and just give it to friends and maybe sell it on Drive-Thru RPG. I'm not entirely sure. I'm still not quite sure about going forward like more publicly with the game or not, because 3rd edition was, I liked it, a lot of people did, but I don't know, it just didn't really, I couldn't get anybody to review it, and like several people said they would and they never did, and I sent them free copies, and it's a whole thing. I've mentioned it before. And then I was playtesting Red Sun, which seemed to get a little bit more of a a little bit more of a vibe going when I was doing it at Dragon Con and some other places. Although SK tested out as well. So, I'm happy that both of them seem to be doing pretty well. Anyway, but this is not about Red Sun. This is about the magic or sorcery system, as I prefer to call it, in Savage Kingdoms 4th edition. And the reason I prefer to use the term sorcery is magic is a very broad term, right? Sorcery is a little bit more, kind of narrows it down. But it is a sword and sorcery-ish game. It's set in a Dark Ages kind of thing, so it's not like your traditional sort of ancient world setting like Conan. But not all sword and sorcery settings are antiquated era. I mean, most of them are, but some do kind of lean into early Dark Ages. In fact, Robert E. Howard's world itself kind of had a little bit of flavoring of that. And so Savage Kingdoms, as I mentioned before, it's kind of set in sort of a Dark Ages if we were to correlate it to the real world history. Anyway, so Magic and SK, these are things that are different, or at least tweaks. Well, not everything's different, but I'm just going to kind of run over that. I got 10 points to kind of cover about the magic or sorcery system in Savage Kingdoms 4th edition. And again, kind of like in the combat video from last week, most of this is the same. It's 95% the same. But I'll try to touch on some of the little tweaks and differences and just kind of show you how overall the SK system is, I'm pretty happy with it. It's unique for the most part in its own way. It's definitely a lot different than D&D Magic, which I'm not a huge fan of spell slots and all that stuff. But, I run it for kids and stuff, and it's fine. All right, so the first point in the magic or sorcery in SK4, the next edition, if it happens, which it kind of is, at least in playtest form right now. Point number one, sorcery and magical arts. Flavor and theme. So I just kind of mentioned it there a little bit. So it is kind of mostly a sword and sorcery-ish setting, meaning that it's pretty gritty. Most of your adventures are dealing with kind of more localized events instead of giant Dark Lord stuff like in high fantasy, although you can totally do that in Savage Kingdoms as well. It's kind of set up for that. And so just know that thematically, magic is a little bit dark, and it's kind of grim, and it can be kind of dangerous. And it's not really accepted in most, if not all, cultures unless it's part of a tradition. In other words, if you're a shaman from a tribe, you're kind of trusted to dabble in the magical arts, and it'll be fine. You know what you're doing. It's cool. Just like the blacksmith is allowed to kind of know his little secrets about smithing and stuff. Everybody's kind of assumed that that person knows what they're doing, kind of let them do their thing. It's all good. Sorcery gets very distrusted when something in the setting that's called a wild mage. I know in D&D that means something else, but a wild mage is kind of a term thrown on magicians or spellcasters in the SK setting that are not attached to a particular tradition or sect or order. So it's kind of a flip. Not every culture uses that term, but wild mage is pretty widely used. I think I mentioned it in the books. So yeah, see if you can find it in there. It's the fun stuff to role playing wise. Instead of just everyone accepting every single spellcaster and everything's happy and unicorn. No, magic is actually pretty dark, and though it does get jobs done in certain ways, the reason it's called sorcery in the more traditional sense of the word, is that it's a darker approach of magic. It's almost like an unnatural practice, whereas magic flows through the veins of, say, the Alunashi and some of the more ancient, more magical races in the Savage Kingdom setting, whereas humans have to kind of learn like hacks, and that's kind of where the term sorcery kind of comes in. Although again, it's kind of a broad term, but if you want to use magic as kind of the overarching way to explain anything wondrous, that miraculous, which in a Dark Age setting can be a lot of things. Whereas sorcery is a little more honed in on the practice about like making a magical effect happen. All right, so I'm going to skip on to number 2. So number 2, there's the 7 disciplines of the magical arts still exist because I'm pretty happy with that system. I like the number 7. It's very mystical. It has a very ancient world feel to it. Carrying on into the modern world, the number 7 is very biblical, and also in other non-Zionist, non-Judaic Christian religions, also 7 is kind of a big deal, and so as a number in some of those other religions as well, and mythologies. So you still have air, earth, fire, water, death, life, and shadow. So air, earth, fire, and water are the 4 elemental types of magical disciplines. And then death, life, and shadow are considered the spirit types, or the energy types. And so that's the 7 different types. So it's kind of a broad term. Like in game, the term isn't often used as much. It's more of a gamist term to kind of quantify all the different where the spells would fall inside. Although the term, I have at NPCs used the terminology a little bit, like I'm an air mage, an air magician, or this sect only teaches us fire magic and life magic. And that's probably a very broad way of looking at it. It's fine, but it's probably really more of a gamist term. So yeah, air, earth, fire, water, death, life, and shadow. So air, earth, fire, and water, the 4 elemental types, run off of your, as in the past, run off of your willpower attribute. So it is, so on your skill roll, it would be, you would add your roll D20, because D20 is the only dice that you need in Savage Kingdoms, as most of you probably already know. Don't have to worry about the other dice, makes the game a lot faster. And every number you roll above when you're doing when in combat and often in spellcasting means a greater success, right? So none of the numbers are thrown away. I mentioned that more in the combat video because it's more prevalent in combat, because that's where your damage is coming from, by how much you succeed against your opponent's defense. But anyway, air, earth, fire, and water are controlled by your willpower stat. So, for example, say if your character has a +2 willpower and has 1 skill level in earth magic, that's 3. You add 3 to the die roll, +3, right? So that's where the formula comes from. Or another example would be, say, so death, life, and shadow, or actually death and life run off of your vigor attribute, because it's your life, your health, and that's where death and life magic is more kind of connected to. So, for example, if you have a vigor of +3, which is pretty extraordinary, not ridiculously over the top, but like 1 out of like maybe 200, 300 people have that. And you have 2 skill levels in the magical arts, so that'd be +5. You would add to your die roll whenever casting a death or life magic, depending on which type of magic which talent, which tells what type of magic I'll get to in a second, that you can cast. Shadow is the only one that Shadow runs off of intellect. So it is the reason I did that is because it kind of harkened it back a little bit to like old school Dungeons and Dragons when the first illusionist class came out, and they were often kind of like high intelligence type people. And so yeah, and also it's kind of crafty. It's like a lot of mind magic, and its illusions can be kind of crafty. So to me, it made more sense to make it run off the intellect attribute. So for another example would say, let's do a higher. Let's say you're only +0 your intellect, so you're average, which is just enough to even be a magician at all, a spellcaster. But let's say this is an advanced character, you got 6 skill levels in shadow magic. So that adds, you're correct, +6 to the die roll, right? 0 + 6. 6 skill levels plus the 0. Say if you increased your intellect to +1, that's an appropriate advancement where you could do that. Then all of a sudden you're +7 with any shadow magic spells. So just some examples. Moving on to number 3, skill roll like anything else. So the reason I mention this is because in Dungeons and Dragons, other than making spell attack rolls with certain spells, you typically do not roll to see if the spell works, unlike a lot of game systems, including Savage Kingdoms. So I might have mentioned this in the last video about combat, and if not, I'm mentioning it now. But Dungeons and Dragons kind of has like attacking like stuff, and other skills are kind of not the same. They're kind of separate for some reason. It goes back to the history of the game. I get it, but and magic is kind of its own thing, not really attached to a skill, although Arcana kind of sort of is. But so my point being is that just like any other skill, whether you're making an acrobatics check to cartwheel across an open field, or making a survival check to look for tracks or whatever, or herbalism to find some healing herbs out in the forest, attacking and casting a spell is a skill as well. And this skill in this case is the magical arts skill. And I just kind of touched upon the 7 disciplines. So the broader skill is magical arts, and then it's divided into 7 disciplines. So you've got magical arts air, magical arts fire, magical arts shadow, etc. So that's how that works. So whenever you're casting the spell, like I mentioned just a minute or two ago, you make that skill roll, magical arts, you look at whatever one that you're using, magical arts fire, we'll say, and then that's the bonus you apply to the die roll. And you compare it to a difficulty rating, a DR. In previous systems of Savage Kingdoms, it was called a DL, difficulty level, which is fine. But for some reason, I just felt like going with difficulty rating this time. I don't know. I just wanted to change the terminology up a little bit because it's a new edition, and also it also ties in with like defensive rating, which is technically ADR, right? A difficulty rating. Yeah, it's a small matter, but that nomenclature has changed a bit. So you're making a skill just like anything. For example, if you're casting a spell that you need magical arts level 3 to even learn or be able to cast, which means you would not be able to start with it unless you have the adept talent to where you can start with a level 3 skill. You would add your skill level plus the relevant ability, like I mentioned a couple minutes ago. That provides your bonus to the D20 roll, and you're trying to compare it to a target number, which in this case is, like I said, a DR, difficulty rating. For example, a 3rd level spell where you need at least 3 levels in whatever magical arts discipline that it is. Let's say you need skill level 3, right? So that would be a DR of 13. So basically the DRs are 10 plus whatever minimum skill level you need to cast that spell. That's how you come up with the formula. So just a magical arts level 1 spell you would only need to roll an 11 to make the spell work. A 5th level spell you would need a 15, etc. 9th level which is Grand Mastery Magic, and only about 4 or 5 NPCs in the entire setting even know that level of magic. You would need a 19 to make the spell work. But it's not as hard as you think because you're kind of scaling up along with that. So someone capable of casting 9th level spells or 8th level spells, casting a 1st level spell it's almost automatic, other than rolling a natural 1, which I'm about to get to. And also, it's a skill roll like anything else, like I mentioned, magical arts. However, any skill other than magical arts, you can try whether you have any training in it or not. Training means skill level. So, for example, including alchemy, which I almost wasn't going to do. The reason why I allow people to, in the rules, to make alchemy skill rolls even without training in it is because the DRs are pretty high. It's already kind of built in, especially making stuff. So magical arts is the only skill that you need a skill level in, or a talent, a special talent, to be able to cast. For example, acolyte, meaning that your training was more kind of religious, and that's where you learned this. You dabbled in some magic. Another one is apprentice, which is more you learn magic directly from a master, from an apprentice who kind of may or may not have been a priest. He might have just studied on his own or whatever. And I think there's 1 or 2 other, like magic affinity allows you to do that as well. So these are what I call qualifier talents, or prerequisites that are needed. So you do, in other words, to summarize what I just kind of muttered, to be able to even make any skill rolls on any kind of magical arts skill. You have to have at least that talent to be able to do it. Otherwise, it represents the fact that most people, the vast majority of people in this setting, do not really have hardly any knowledge of the magical arts as qualified into someone who's learning and training to do it. They might know in fact, there's a talent called folk magic that I'm still working on to put in the rules. That represents somebody that's kind of might have dabbled, or they believe this incantation they mutter might work and give some kind of effect. And if you do take the talent, it does, but it's very minor. It's like, magical arts level 1 type. It's like half of that. It's like almost like it's even less powerful than like a cantrip in D&D, which isn't saying much because in D&D 5e cantrips are actually pretty powerful. They're almost like first level spells, but so you would need a qualifier talent to even make any skill rolls dealing with magical arts. Number 4, what I was kind of just hinting at there. So non-ritual spells critically fail on a natural 1 on the D20 on the skill roll, magical arts skill roll. They always fail. The reason I punch that out is because if you know the system, and if you watched the last video, if you roll a natural 1 and total it up, say you have a +3 bonus and whatever it is that you're rolling, that's a 4, 1 + 4, for example, and the difficulty rating was 15. So you failed by 11. That is a critical failure. So if you fail by 10 or more, that is a critical failure on whatever that you were doing. However, that does not apply to spell casting. All natural ones is a critical failure. And yes, there's luck. There's the luck trait that you can spend a luck point to roll again on something, but you lose the luck point. So there is that. But yeah, so unless you cast a spell as a ritual, so for example, if you are casting a spell as a ritual and you get a natural 1, your total will probably end up being at least like +5 or so, unless you're casting at a really high level, and then it's probably not going to critically fail. If you're casting a spell in what's called spontaneous or battle magic, loosely, meaning that you're casting it as 2 actions, and usually that's 98% of the time that's in combat, right? 99% of the time that's a combat spell or something you want to do very fast. It only costs 2 actions, basically 4 seconds. That is, so a natural 1 will critically fail. So, and it kind of makes sense thematically because I wanted to make magic trickier and dark and a little more serious and not trivial, and people to take it a little more seriously, and maybe even to be a little frightened of it, even if you are a magician, a mage. Yeah, and it represents the fact that if you're throwing this incantation out really fast, where honestly it should be a ritual, then there's a really good, not a really good, but there's a decent chance that it's going to backfire and do something. And each spell has a critical failure list, like what it does. And they're kind of fun. I mean, they're kind of dark and harmful, and as they should be, but they're kind of fun. They add a little level of edge and darkness to it. And there's a critical success thing listed as well. Just to go over how critical successes work, if you roll a natural 20, you get to either roll the D20 again and add that result to the original result, including your bonus. You don't add the bonus twice, though. Or you add +10 to the roll. So, for example, you roll a natural 20. You might want to just take the +10, which GMs, by the way, have to always take the +10. We're not going to do the swingy roll thing. Let's say, for example, you roll a natural 20 and you're like, I'm just going to take the +10. So 30, then plus whatever your bonus is. We'll say it's +4, whatever. So 34. If that's 20 above the target number or the difficulty rating, that is a critical success. So my example there with 34, the DR would have to be 14 or lower, and you would critically succeed in what you're doing. If it's a spell, then it's listed in the spell, like what happens with a critical success is at the bottom of the spell entry or spell description. And all the other 27 skills in the game are the same way too. It lists, at least it gives you. Some of them list it's fairly hard coded, like in combat. Others, different things can happen, and it's really the GM can come up with his or her own effects. But it does often list. Well, often it always does. It lists like what could have, like possibilities of what some suggestions, in other words, of what the critical success could be. All right. So, and speaking of ritual spell, going to point number five is ritual spells are now a +4 bonus. So they were +2. They still take an hour. I was going to change it and make it like half an hour. I was like, just just an hour. Like, come on. It's a ritual. And then you get a +4 bonus. So the least you can do is spend an hour. And you still have to have certain components that are listed in the spell thing. You have to have like magical arts skill level 1 through 3 spells. You only need 1 item, or is it 2? I can't remember. And then levels 4 through 6, you need 2, or maybe it's 3. I think it's 3 items. And then 7 to 9 or 10, because there actually are level, because every skill can go up to level 10 now, which is Grand Mastery. There are level 10 spells technically in SK. You need 4 items for that, and it lists on there. You might need like an iron nail and a 4-leaf clover, or a vial of acid, or a snake's tongue, or a bat's wing, or something like that. It's kind of listed the possibilities of what you can get, and it kind of makes it fun as you get to gather those kind of things, and that can be a lot of fun. So if you have the components, you spend an hour on a ritual, you get a +4 bonus to the magical arts roll, meaning that you have a lot better chance of succeeding, or at least succeeding better than you would have. And also, they do not auto crit fail. So you're very unlikely going to critically fail a ritualized spell unless you're like fatigued and you have all these other wounded really bad, where you have these other negatives or these other penalties. And that's on purpose. I wanted it to be that way because, as I mentioned in previous videos, in the world, in the fiction, in the SK world, most NPCs, most magicians are using ritual magic. It's really rare they're going to use spontaneous magic other than on the battlefield. And most those guys are not on the battlefield. There's some lords in the game, or that might have, a traveling battle mage that travels with them. But for the most part, 95% of the NPCs are probably going to use ritual magic because it's a lot safer. They've got more time. They're not adventuring and getting in all these scraps like our player character protagonists are. All right, so moving on to point number 6, mystical talents. So mystical talents, well, first of all, talents are one of the building blocks of the game. One of the main things about your character's skills and talents, I would say, and your attributes are kind of the main, like 3 kind of aspects. And there's other important stuff too, like weaknesses and your derived traits and all that stuff. But those are really your main building blocks. So there are different categories of talents, as in the previous editions. 6 categories of talents, which still exist. The only thing that's changed is one category is now called miscellaneous instead of other. In previous editions, they were just called like other talent. I was like other. I just kind of I decided to go with miscellaneous this time for whatever reason. But one of the 6 categories of talents is mystical. And the reason I mentioned them here in this video about magic is because these talents many of the talents kind of augment your magic, your spellcasting ability. For example, Evil Eye, Energized Spell, Blood Magic, Blighter, Far-Reaching Magic, stuff like that. These are cool little, and there's a bunch of others, that kind of augment your magical arts. For example, Blighter is kind of fun. You can, it only works on life and death magic, but you're pulling life force from plants and small animals nearby, flora and fauna, to craft your spell. And basically what you're doing, you're using that life essence in order that you don't have to pay the health cost for it. Because as you know, in SK, another kind of unique thing, actually pretty much all healing spells, which are all under the life magic discipline, also take a little bit of life essence from the magician, him or herself. Meaning that you're taking a little bit of your own life force to heal someone else. It doesn't just magically come out of nowhere. Although in this case, if you have the Blighter talent, you can like pull it from the nearby vegetation, and it does kind of rot it and blacken it. So a lot of people don't really like it. So Blighters are usually hunted down, or at least kind of shunned. So it's another fun role-playing opportunity, and every time they use that ability, they have to make a resolve roll, and I think it's against DR 8 or 10, to prevent from gaining the corrupted or tainted weakness. So if you do it enough, you're probably, which makes sense. If you do it enough, you're becoming kind of a nasty person who doesn't care literally about life, at least on that scale. Blood magic is cool, kind of cool. It does a couple things. One, you can cut yourself and power your spells through blood. In other words, game mechanically, you exchange health for stamina points. Because stamina fuels magic, which I'll get to in a second. But which is kind of cool. And also, it's blood magicians are better if they can sacrifice like animals and stuff to add more power to their ritual spells, which is really cool. Very thematic, in a lot of mythology and really, honestly, actual history and stuff like that, and also a lot in fantasy. Evil Eye, Energize Spell. Yeah, there's a bunch of others. Far-reaching magic, stuff like that. So yeah, these mystical talents can kind of augment your Swift Magic is a really good one if you can get that one. Battle Mage. Swift Magic allows you to cast a spell as a action instead of two actions, so that's pretty major. It does cost like I think it's 2 extra stamina points to rush it that fast. Yeah, so that's Swift Magic. Yeah. I wanted to cover another one, but anyway, there's a number of, there's like 20, 25 mystical talents that kind of augment. Not all mystical talents augment directly magical arts. There's some things that are mystical that aren't necessarily spellcasting, such as the Seer talent, where you can kind of like concentrate on a person, place, or object and get kind of a dream vision, kind of like an impression in your head of like maybe what's going on with them. Almost like predicting the future in a way. So that's kind of cool. And it's not really a spell. It's just something that people are kind of born with. Although you can acquire the talent later through downtime, but you have to have a really good story reason, like why it just came to you or something. Death Touched is another mystical talent that's kind of interesting. That's not necessarily directly magic or sorcery. It means that you either died or were really close to it or had a very close brush with it, and when you came to out of your coma or whatever, you suddenly have this ability to kind of like sense undead in the area. And I think it also gives you the a specialty in death magic, I think. So, which is kind of interesting. All right, well, enough about mystical talents. Moving on to number 7, shield defense. Shield defense versus physical spells. I wanted to mention that because this is kind of new. So, previous editions of Savage Kingdoms, you had 2 defenses. You had dodge defense and parry defense, right? Dodge pretty much always works. That's really kind of your main defense. Parry works if you have a shield or a weapon in your hand, so you can literally parry, block with your weapon. But that only works if you actually have a shield or weapon in your hand. And then there's kind of like there's one called shield defense, which is just an extension of your parry defense. And shield defense is literal. Like if you have an actual shield, you gain. So a shield will give you +1 to +3 bonus to your parry defense, depending on the size of it. A buckler or small shield is +1. A medium shield, which most people usually have, like unless your kind of typical round Viking shield or maybe your coffin-shaped sort of Celtic shield, or even other than some of the really large body shields that the Greeks had, some of those, one of those type of shields. And then you got +3 for a large shield, which would be those giant convex Greek type shields, or more in the setting like the Laurentian shield, which is like the Roman legionnaire mantlet, those big body shields. We give you a +3 bonus. Anyway, so how does that apply to magic? So the reason it applies is that you can now use your shield defense against physical spells. So like if something shoots acid out, or it conjures like you can sling a rock at somebody with earth magic, you can block it with a shield. So anything that's physical, and most of the spells, it's kind of obvious. There'll be some times where the GM will probably have to make a call, but most 90% of the spells, it's very obvious. And it might even mention in there like this is against, you can use your shield against it or whatever. But it should be in almost virtually all cases that it's pretty obvious if a shield would work. Like most shadow magic things, shield's not going to work on, because shadow magic is usually mind or illusion type spells, other than literal light and darkness spells, which is why it's called shadow magic. And then there's a few things like death and life, but a lot of the elemental type magics are having like literal like air magic for like a piercing zephyr you can block with this piercing wind that you can block. So I wanted to mention that. All right, so moving on to number 8, stamina powers spells. I probably should have mentioned this like at the top, but that's fine. I just kind of wrote them down as it came to me. Stamina is a derived trait. It's 10 plus your vigor plus your total resolve, which is based on your willpower plus whatever skill levels you have in the resolve skill. So that means you could start, like, starting average is 10 or 11, 12, probably for PCs, maybe 13. And the average person in the world, NPCs, probably has 10 or 11. And these power magic. So for every skill level, minimal skill level that you need to cast or learn the spell is how many stamina points this costs. So this is how I kind of streamline everything, the DRs and the stamina. So I really kind of like it. I think it works out really well. And it does make the higher level spell, anything over 5th and 6th, 7th, you're now like a 7th level spell is now costing you 7 stamina points. But it should be. That's a lot of drain on your body. But yeah, stamina powers, spells, they always did. I just wanted to let you know how it works now. In previous editions, I assigned stamina costs kind of, I wouldn't say randomly, but there wasn't really a pattern to it. I just kind of based on how rare and how draining the spell would be, kind of based on the description. But now it's a little more streamlined and formalized. So yeah, and when you get to half stamina, as in previous editions, you gain the fatigued condition, unless you have the tireless talent. And now it's not guaranteed. In previous editions, it was just automatic. You're like, oh, I have tireless. I'm not affected. I don't have the -2 penalty for being fatigued. Now you have to make an actual roll. I think it's a resolve roll against DR 12 or 15. So it's not automatic anymore, and nor should it have been, in my opinion. So I think in SK3, I just didn't want to have to deal with another roll there. But I think it's worth it because that's a somewhat rare talent to have. So it's not like everybody's rolling that thing every time. And it only comes up when you get to fatigued. Exhausted means that you're at 0 stamina. So you're completely wiped out, exhausted, wiped out. That's -4 to all your die rolls, defense, and mobility. So fatigued is -2 to all of that. I mentioned in the previous video, I've made things a little more modular. Most things are in -2, -4, -6, or +2. Obviously, there's some +1s here and there, but any kind of condition, for the most part, goes in 2s instead of having to track 1s, if that makes any sense. And I think that's a little bit easier math and also a little less clunky. However, the 2 conditions stack now. So, for example, if you get half stamina and you're therefore fatigued, and you also get to half your health, and therefore staggered. Staggered and fatigued actually both stack now. They're both -2, so that's -4. And I like that because I wanted to make the game a little more dangerous and gritty and a little more kind of real and palpable, without being too overboard. I mean, -4 is pretty harsh. But when you're a more experienced, higher level, so to speak, higher advancement character, it's not that big a deal. But yeah, I wanted, you shouldn't try not to get to half health or maybe even half stamina. But anyway, and I think it's sleeker game design, not having, like in the previous edition, it said that staggered and fatigue do not stack. And so then I always question myself, why did I even call it 2 different things? Other than just like descriptive. So now they literally are 2 different things, which I think is cool. And that kind of, and now that I've put everything down to -2, -4, I think it works. It stacks together modularly. So that's stamina. And then you can gain stamina by advancement. The only way stamina and health even go up, it's not like in D&D where like you gain a level and suddenly magically have like 5 or 8 more hit points. Your health and stamina only go up if something in the formula goes up. For example, health is based on physique and the endurance skill. So unless you increase your endurance or happen to be at an advancement where you can gain +1 to your attribute, unless you do any of those, your health is staying the same. Same with stamina. And I wanted it to be that way. I think that's a little more... look back at the video I did like a few weeks ago where I talked about, or maybe a month or 2 ago, where I talked about sim-light games, a term that I recently kind of heard. I don't know why I just recently heard it, because I've been doing this for forever, but meaning that simulation light, it's games that tabletop role-playing games and also computer games that are trying to, yes, it's fantasy, we're having a good time, it's role playing, blah blah blah, we're telling a story, but there is a little more extra little attention spent on the details of realism or believability in the setting. Where some games are kind of flippant, like, oh yeah, the rabbit pops out of your butt and casts a spell and everyone blows up. That's a little ridiculous. But whereas we're trying to pay a little more attention to physics, and we're trying to make the world, though a fantasy world, a little more believable and grounded. So, and I think people connect to that more because the more you base a fantasy world, at least to some degree, on the real world, you're going to get a lot more resonance from people because we live in the real world, so we kind of know, what the game master is trying to describe for the most part within reason. And then just add those fantastical layers, kind of layer them on top. Number 9, knowledge of one spell per skill level in a MA discipline, magical arts discipline. So that note was to remind me that, this is point number 9, and we're almost done, is that you only know one spell per level of magical arts that you have. For example, let's say you're a shadow mage and you start off and you just have 2 skill levels in shadow magic or magical arts shadow. So you would only know 2 spells. However, I know that sounds really low, but it's number 1, it's somewhat easy, and it's a really good treasure item from game masters. It's somewhat easy to find spells, and you can kind of like wizards in Dungeons & Dragons, wizards class. They can actually add spells, gain spells, and write them in their book. Such is true in in Savage Kingdoms. I was about to say Magical Kingdoms. Savage Kingdoms, you can actually, even though traditionally most magic is learned orally, that's why not every incantation is exactly the same. But a lot of, some cultures will write them down. In any case, it doesn't really matter. You can learn new spells by finding them, whether they're written on an old scroll or a tome, or written on an ancient pillar in a temple, or whether some old hermit teaches it to you during downtime or whatever. Point is, mages can learn more spells than just the one, or in that example, the 2 that they started with. There's also a couple of talents that help you, like grimoire. The grimoire talent, you have this old book, has an extra spell in it that you can start with. I think the acolyte talent also gives you an extra spell. That means you were trained by a priest. So you're trained in a more formal sect is what that represents. Apprentice, I think, might as well. But anyway, point is, there are a couple talents that allow you to start with an extra spell, and there are ways of learning them in play. So it's not as low as you think, although I didn't want people to know tons of spells. So anyway, point is, I think it all kind of balances out. I'm pretty happy with it. And that means if you, through advancement, you put skill points into a magical arts, so each skill level of magical arts costs 3 skill points, by the way. So when you advance, you get 10 skill points. So if you want to advance when you're magical arts, assuming you can, because there's a maximum level depending on your advancement, there's a whole chart. So it would cost you 3 points, and then you will learn a new spell. So it is highly recommended that advancement occur during downtime, to make it a little more, again, because it's sim light, a little more realistic, that during this week, you figured out another spell plus whatever other stuff that you were doing, or training for. All right, that was number 9, right? Yep, number 10, armor and encumbrance. This is the last one. Armor and encumbrance affecting spell casting. So that's still a thing, like in previous editions, where wearing body armor, carrying a shield, or being encumbered with a lot of equipment or gear, or carrying a dead body or something, whatever it is, affects certain skills that have an asterisk next to them on the character sheet. And magical arts is one of them. Acrobatics, athletics, I think even brawling. I have a character sheet right here. I should be able to. Stealth, and magical arts all have an asterisk, meaning that they are affected by wearing body armor. Each type of armor has a skill penalty. For example, I'm looking at a character sheet right here. This guy just has light leather armor on, so he has a -1 skill penalty. Now, if he was a magician as well, let's say he was a death mage, he would subtract -1 to his magical arts roll if he were wearing that leather armor. If he had leather armor and like a buckler, small shield, that's another -1. He had -2 total. So you can see you can build a warrior mage. Cool, but just know that if you're doing the warrior thing too much with the heavy armor, then you're going to be kind of penalize your spell casting. And also, some battle talents require stamina, so that's also um, why a warrior mage type is cool. But you have to really watch your resources, and I think it balances out well of how to kind of create that in this system. So yes, the point is armor and encumbrance do affect spellcasting, just like those other asterisk skills. There's what, I don't know, a total of like 5 or 6 skills that are affected by armor and too much encumbrance. And yeah, I think that's it. I went through my 10 points about Magic or Sorcery in the Savage Kingdoms 4th edition upcoming game, whether I publish it or just send it out to friends. It doesn't really matter. It is happening. I've got it about 95% written / designed. So yeah, and those of you who have been watching the videos, please like, subscribe, share, all that kind of stuff. And enjoy Savage Kingdoms and other tabletop role-playing games. And I'll talk to you guys again soon.